Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. Today I want to talk about a little bit of something off the beaten path for this channel. As you can probably guess by the title of this video, I want to talk a little bit about Anita Sarkeesian. Anita is the voice and mind behind the Feminist Frequency YouTube channel. Feminist Frequency's most famous series of videos is called Tropes vs. Women in Video Games, and it turned 10 years old this year. I think that makes this an excellent time to look at the enduring legacy of Anita Sarkeesian's work on how we tell stories in the present day. Now, there is a long backstory to Anita Sarkeesian, which I really don't want to dig too deep into here. Anita examined video games from the perspective of what is known as critical theory. That's not something I've talked a whole lot about on this channel, so I'll give you a quick overview before we continue with her work. Critical theory is a system of deconstructing literature that originates in Marxist thought. The purpose of critical theory originally was to examine every piece of literature, every piece of culture, every work of art from the perspective of proletariats being oppressed by the bourgeois. Marxists believed that if they looked through everything through this lens, they could break up and decrease the influence of existing art, which they believed empowered wealthy people to oppress poor people, and replace that art with art which showed how the worker was the most important part of society and was entitled to run it through the communist Marxist system. Now, the basic framework of critical theory is no longer inherently Marxist. It has been appropriated and recycled into a number of other lenses. And it is now basically a generic structure that says all art is constructed with a class in power, the bourgeois, oppressing a more worthy class that is currently subservient, originally the proletariat. Racial critical theory replaces the bourgeois with white people and the proletariat with all non-white people, and feminist critical theory replaces the bourgeois with men and the proletariat with women. So as you might imagine, Anita's original purpose in making Tropes vs. Women in video games was to emphasize how video games showed men oppressing women. So what is the enduring legacy of this project? Well, the enduring legacy is that Anita Sarkeesian and other critical theorists like her have taken over mainstream video game storytelling. All major studios now have some kind of consultant who makes sure that women are depicted in ways that satisfy people with a critical feminist lens. Nor is this the only place this has happened. While Anita Sarkeesian is most famous for her feminist critiques of video games, Feminist Frequency did expand its scope to address all other areas of pop culture. And over the last decade, this critical lens has been applied to music, it has been applied to movies, it has been applied to TV shows. And let me be clear, there is nothing wrong with taking a critical look at any piece of media. And I don't just mean applying critical thinking and discernment to try and tell what is happening in a piece of media, although that is certainly important as well. The basic premise of critical theory, that there are structures in society that are reflected in art, is a valid one, and it can be an important point of view to keep in mind. If you are not an expert on that point of view, well, having people who specialize in articulating that point of view and how it applies to any given piece of work can be very helpful. However, I recently made a video asking the question, why do we not see new stories anymore? In that video, I articulated that one of the major problems was that people who write stories are only being taught a very small, narrow window of stories to tell, and that is what they base all of their work on. So what we get is a bunch of derivative, stale repetitions of the same story and slightly different trappings, rather than new and inventive stories told from one specific creator's point of view. There are a wide number of reasons for this. One of them is critical theory. As I said, critical theory is interested in one specific perspective, the perspective of a proletariat oppressed by a bourgeois, with those two variables swapped out for whatever other groups of people you want to use in critical theory. The problem is that is a single narrative. You cannot simply take out proletariat and bourgeois and replace them with men and women and change the narrative. You really haven't. And the people who are behind critical theory are aware of this. They know they are trying to sell the same story to a wide variety of people. That's the whole point. They want this to be the only way people think about stories, the only way people think about the world around them, because they think that is the way of thinking that will get them the most influence in society. That is as it may be. Personally, I'm a little bit doubtful things will work out quite that way, although they have done pretty well so far. As I said, critical theory has basically taken over all storytelling venues, or at least all the mainstream ones. The problem is, when you only tell one story, it gets stale. I talked about this when I talked about the universal human story. A Christmas Carol is a great story with a lot of great things to say about human nature and the world we live in. But the problem is, you can only watch a Christmas Carol marathon for so long before you get a little bit bored and you want to go watch something else. Maybe you watch the inversion of that story and you watch It's a Wonderful Life. Maybe you watch the other inversion of that story and you watch A Christmas Story or National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. I don't know what floats your boat. Point is, stories need a certain amount of variety to them to hold the audience's attention. And right now, although there are great stories you can tell about Group A being oppressed by Group B, people are sick and tired of those stories. Mainstream entertainment is starting to lose a lot of its clout, a lot of its respect, and a lot of its mainstream appeal because they have become so fixated on this one pre-approved narrative. Ultimately, the mainstream methods of storytelling are losing influence. A lot of alternatives are coming up to take their place. YouTube is one of them, Twitch is another. Independents in all mediums, video games, movies, books, and publishing, are all thriving in the current environment. A little-known comic character created by Todd McFarlane called Spawn is currently bringing in more money than Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man from Marvel and DC put together. At least in the comics, obviously not in the movies. Yet. Ultimately, this growing disconnect between our storytellers and their audience is going to be the enduring legacy of Anita Sarkeesian and the people who have followed in her wake. By making critical theory the only lens we can approach storytelling through in the mainstream, they have ushered in a growing decline in these storytelling mediums. Is that what they intended? I don't know. I doubt it, but it can be hard to say. People who believe in the critical theory class struggle often believe that the art and mediums that kept it in place are worthy of destruction, so maybe Anita will be satisfied with this. But I kind of suspect she won't be. I think the purpose here was to try and get critical theory in front of as many people as possible and usher in a golden age of critical theory storytelling. But the fact is, no genre of storytelling has a golden age for more than 10 or 15 years before it goes into decline. I think we're seeing the decline of critical theory storytelling starting now. It was a good run while it lasted, Anita, but I think it's time for you to step aside and let fresh voices take over. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. Let me know what kind of narratives you would like to see in storytelling going forward. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I will talk to you later.